Hello and welcome to the Digital Digest, your weekly breakfast of insights, tips and tricks and general information that will help anyone trying to move things forward in this digital world of accounting. This show is brought to you both by the Digital Disruptors and SB Digital, which are pushing the boundaries in the digital accounting space. I'm your host, Ryan Piercy, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by Kelly from Solvaa, who's going to help us dive into the world of Zapier, who is definitely the expert in this place and can talk through the benefits, some of the pain points, and also how you can use Zapier to, enhance your digital ecosystem. So firstly, I guess I should kind of reach out to you, Kelly, and say, please explain to the people, if they've never come across it before, what is Zapier?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do, Ryan, is correct you in terms of the pronunciation. Because it's actually Zapier, and lots of people do this. Zapier have a kind of, what would you call it? A way of explaining it. Zapier makes you happier is their kind of tagline for it.
Brilliant.
So what is Zapier? Zapier is what I would call a connector tool. So you have lots of different software that can communicate with each other using native integrations. And when you can't use a native integration or they don't have a native integration, or you want to do something more custom in terms of automating something, you can use a tool like Zapier to connect over 6,000 different tools together to automate different things. So you can create bespoke automation workflows to connect your tools together.
Brilliant. And so 6,000 is crazy. I know like Xero's got like 1,000, or more than 1,000 apps it's connected to. And I did a post on LinkedIn recently going through all the research we'd carried out on different apps. And it was, somewhere around the 150 to 200 mark. So 6,000 apps to try and connect in can be quite overwhelming. But I assume you don't need to necessarily know all of those apps, because the way Zapier works is a very mechanized and regimented process. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you just need to understand what you're using in your tech stack. So if you're using Microsoft Outlook, Pixie, or Practice Ignition, or whatever, all you need to know is, can your app connect with Zapier? Is it one of those 6,000 odd connections? And to understand how Zapier works, to be able to move data between different apps, but also to do things within those specific apps that you're using.
Brilliant. And I believe it's all done via a secure API, i.e. those apps are connected to Zapier as they would do to any other program. You're not got any screen scraping, nothing like that. It's connected and it's only what's shared via that API. So although a system may say it's connected to Zapier, there's kind of limits or restrictions on what it can or cannot be shared. Is that right?
That is true. So basically, so Zapier will create an integration with, let's just say, Practice Ignition, okay, or Pixie or Microsoft Outlook. So Zapier creates that integration, or they collaborate to create this integration. They specify what triggers and actions you can use, and I can explain that in a little bit more detail a bit later. But then you basically will authenticate the connection using your account. So essentially your username and password in most cases, so that you're saying, yes, Zapier can use my connection to get data from those tools that I'm using with it.
Great, yeah. Because security has become more and more important to people now. When I think cloud first came out, it was like, yes, we've got these tools, let's just sign up and connect them together. And now, people are realizing actually we need to be very considerate on what data is stored where and how it's shared. Now, you've touched on some of the benefits of using Zapier, and I have to get my head right in saying Zapier, not Zapier. I've been saying it wrong for so many years. It's about the ability to connect and automate data flow. But there's, I guess, other benefits to it, and also some risks and where things can go wrong. Can you touch a little bit on, from your experience, some of those?
Yeah, I've just enhanced a few on a few more benefits there. So basically, one of the biggest things with using a tool like Zapier is getting back time. So if you can automate different things within the business, you are then able to get back time to do other things. But then there's also the intangible benefits of, making sure that if you're taking away manual and repetitive tasks, you're then allowing people to do the job that they really should be doing as the humans rather than the robots, what you could be getting the robots to do. So there are those intangible benefits as well. In terms of risks, I think one of the biggest things is if you don't think about the process properly from start to finish when you're creating an automated workflow, there is the risk that you could be corrupting your data because you haven't considered every step in the workflow. So say, for example, if you don't put in conditions to stop that workflow from running, if certain things are not matching, you could be corrupting data. That's a big one. There's also the risk of cost. So with Zapier, you essentially, the more you automate, the more you pay for it. So again, if you don't think about the workflow properly and put in place conditions, you could actually be costing yourself a lot of money because your workflows are running too often without being filtered out.
And that's because they charge.
Sorry,
that's because they charge per zap, right, or bundle of zaps.
No, they charge per task. So if we had, a zap is the automated workflow where you might have different steps in that workflow. So if we thought about, let's just say, for example, you have a website and you have a form on that website, like an Elementor form on that website. If that form gets submitted, that would be your trigger. Sorry, I guess we can just talk about some of the terminology. So the trigger is the first point that starts that workflow. So Elementor form gets submitted on your website. You then want to add that inquiry into your CRM. So let's just say you're using Pixie as your CRM. You can then add that contact with that inquiry into Pixie. And then you might want to send an automated email using Microsoft Outlook to say, hey, thanks, we received this, your web form, your inquiry, we'll be in contact tomorrow. So that workflow might be, with the trigger, it might be 2 action steps. So trigger is what happens in one place, action is the consequence of what you want to put in place afterwards. So trigger, number 1, action step number 1 would be the Pixie step, and the action step number 2 would be the Outlook email going out. So a task is every time that workflow runs, every time a web form is submitted, a task would be those 2 actions. So in that particular workflow, we've got 2 actions, which are 2 tasks that have run successfully. And Zapier, there's a lot of structure in terms of the plans that you have, but essentially it's based on the number of tasks that you have access to in a month. So on the free plan, for example, you have access to 100 tasks in a month, but you could have 2 million tasks running. The more you automate, the more you pay for, basically. But that's what it is. That's how the breakdown of the pricing pretty much is.
It makes sense. And what you're doing is replacing something that a human being would have to do, right? With a bot, which is, Zapier in this case. So the more you do, I guess the more time you're saving, the more time you get back. So, you've got that cost recovery piece. And I think the other bit that you have to consider whenever you're going through, whether you want to create a Zap or an integration via Zapier, is to consider that investment against that return over time. So if you're saving time, how much is it going to cost you to learn and then implement this system, and, as you say, mitigate the risks so that you don't corrupt your data? So we talked a little bit about how you structure a flow, but how do you go about identifying, I guess, what the trigger should be, what those actions should be? What's your process, Kelly?
So as a business, we do this every day with clients. So we help them to understand whether or not they're using the right systems, whether or not the process is efficient, and what they can then optimize with automation. So to me, automation is kind of like the last thing that you should be doing. You should be going back to the basics and understanding, okay, have you got the right apps in your tech stack? That's number 1. Are you optimized for usage in those apps? So are you using all the functionality? Are you using automation that's built into those apps? That's kind of crucial as well, because if you're paying for something, you might as well be using that functionality before you start thinking about using a tool like Zapier. So that's all the internal stuff. Is the process efficient? So are the things that you can take out of the process? And then that's only after that do you start thinking, okay, I know all of this other stuff is working. I can now start trying to think about what I can automate with Zapier to optimize that entire process now. So I think the critical thing is understanding what apps you have, making sure that they're optimized. Try to understand what your process is. So mapping out the process is really, really important. And I think investing the time to do that is critical because it'll help you to understand where you have inefficiencies, where people are doing things differently to each other if they do the same job, and understanding as a team how you can improve that process before you start thinking about automation. And why I say this is because if you try to automate an inefficient process, you're just basically optimizing that inefficiency, and then you're going to be creating a situation where you're spending more money on something that is kind of pointless to automate. Completely. So don't just think about automation. There's some things that should not be automated, and those are kind of the things that really should involve the human aspect, where you still want to maintain that personal touch with things. But there are also inefficient things that shouldn't be automated.
Completely agree, Kelly. And I think, it's music to my ears because it's that difference between lifting and shifting or a digital transformation, actually reinventing how you operate by using new modern tools. And the process mapping is so imperative. We've done a whole session on this in previous Digital Digest episodes, so please check that out because you need to do that. Whether you do, you go down using Zapier or not, it's imperative that you understand how you operate and then how you may operate in a new world. So yeah, that's critical. So look, we've done at SB Digital, we've done some work with Zapier, and I would say it's definitely a skill. Like the way you have to map a flow out, it's not quite coding, but you need to understand the mechanisms that go into creating that flow. And I guess a lot of that will be understanding the client's needs and then seeing if you can replicate that or re-engineer that. So not replicate in a lift and shift way, but re-engineer that through a new process. So is that something that's critical to you when you do this work? Is it you kind of have a scoping session and then you report back, this is how it should work before you go and build something?
Yeah, exactly. So again, it goes back to what I was explaining earlier on. One, we look at the systems. Have they got the right systems? Are you using them properly? Is the process efficient? So we would look at the process mapping, do the process mapping with the client to understand, from start to finish what they do. And for somebody doing process mapping, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be fancy process maps and feel like this is like a 6-month exercise. You can actually do it in half a day by, getting the team together and just understanding step 1, we do this. Why do we do it? Where do we do it? How do we do it? When do we do it? If you kind of just break that down into, that principle of 5 W's, 1 H, that really works very well to understand exactly the process. And then with the Zapier side, you have to really understand how Zapier is working, can work with the apps that you want to try to automate. So what triggers does Zapier allow you to use? What actions does Zapier allow you to use? And those are the basics, and anybody can learn how to use Zapier in that sense, as long as you understand the logic and how to map the steps when you're actually building out the workflow. So I think the hardest thing is building your first Zap. That is the hardest thing. And as soon as you understand how to do it, it's kind of like a hero moment of getting it right, and you're like, oh my god, I've just built this amazing thing that's going to save me an hour.
I have power.
Yeah. And then once you're a little bit more au fait with it, you could even get a little bit more complicated and understand there's certain things that you can't do with the existing triggers and actions that are built into the integration. You can start getting a little bit more complex by understanding the API documentation and seeing what more you can actually do with it, because sometimes there are things that are built into the integration that don't allow you to do everything you can do with the API. So it can be fun.
There's things like that we've explored where you need to extract data, you need to manipulate data, and then take that kind of manipulated data and push it into another system. And so you need a mid step, like an Excel or Google Sheets table, which you kind of input in data, and then you've got some formula doing what you need before you bring stuff in. And you can be very creative, as you say. But the bit I would say is I think you have kind of downplayed the complexity and risk that goes into this, because we've done it, and as you highlighted early on, there is a risk of data corruption, and it's really hard to know exactly every scenario that is going to play out, especially on some of the complex flows that you might be looking at. And so as soon as you turn it on, the Zap just runs, and then you might not pick up what it's doing, or if it's doing something wrong, until a little while later, and trying to unravel that can be challenging. So I did want to touch on is, do you have anything that you bring into your flows that does like a check or balance, i.e. you put something in and then you're going to verify it? There's a step of kind of verification. Do you have that?
Yes. So I just want to highlight that this is one of the reasons why it's so important to map the process, because yes, you may not be able to immediately understand every little thing that may impact that workflow when it's running, but you'll be able to capture it, probably 60% of the scenarios that could happen that will impact it. So that's going to reduce that risk, definitely. But then once you have actually built that workflow out, testing it is super important. And I would always say, make sure that you test it with dummy data. So create records to test with, so that they're not going to impact any other data within the apps that you're using. Yep. And critically as well, once you have built your Zaps, you need to have some kind of continuous improvement and maintenance in place. So Zapier has a really robust error monitoring system. So you have a Zap history where you can go back and troubleshoot problems. That's great. But what people forget is actually you need a really good way of making sure that you can action issues that come up as soon as they come up. So Zapier will send you emails, but there is a really handy built-in app within Zapier called Zapier Manager, which means that you can build Zaps that maintain those workflows essentially. So if there's an error, it sends you a notification. If you've got a task management tool, for example, let's just say Trello, you're using for task management, you can create a card within Trello that says action, go and check out this error. Yeah. And I think it's also important that if you have multiple people in the business who are using Zapier, or you're trying to introduce it, you do need some kind of a system in place, just like it's a digital transformation situation. You do need people who are responsible for the process and the app, and maybe identifying somebody who is always going to be the one who will action sorting out problems, so that everybody knows what's going on in the background, but you actually have somebody who is responsible for checking things and adjusting them. And you kind of basically need, I like to call them champions. So if you have like an automation champion who is proactively trying to get other people in the team to embrace automation, but that person takes responsibility for anything that's going on in the background and maintaining the account and keeping on top of errors, I think is good.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily need to be someone internally. You can have a consultant that you work with that monitors that. But I'd say that mirrors very much what's happened in the cloud accounting space, where you could have 5 different products you work with, and you'll have a support contract with that product, but the integrations are just not supported by anyone. So having someone that understands those can help you, whether that's internal or external, is definitely paramount in this kind of modern way of working. It's modern ERP, I guess, as I call it. And as you say, a champion that handles the Zaps is incredibly important, as we have discovered in our work on this so far. What would be really good to hear, Kelly, is maybe like a small use case that you could run through that you've used, like very simple one that maybe people could start using.
Oh, there are so many. I think the thing to some easy things just for you to get started. Just think about the different parts of your business. So if you think break everything down into kind of marketing, sales, the operations side, the finance side, think of one thing in each one of those areas that is manual and repetitive for you. So earlier on, I mentioned the case of a web form is submitted. You want to do something with that web form, whether or not that send out some some information to the person, or you want to add that information into your CRM so that lead doesn't get lost in the ether. So that's one thing that you might want to do. You might want to sync contacts between your email marketing tool, let's just say you're using Constant Contact or MailChimp, and your CRM. That's, a straightforward, probably one-step Zap that you can create. What other things could we put in place? Email notifications based on you doing different things. So let's just say you want to send a reminder, every quarter to a client to tidy up their account so that they can do you can do their VAT return for them, and you want to send that reminder out. Those are just a few examples, but what is really handy is if you sign up for a Zapier account, and there is a new tool within Zapier that is an AI tool called Create a Zap, and you can get access to that by I think it's zapier.com/AI. That it's still in beta, but you can get access to that. And all you have to do is think of something that you might want to automate. So let's just say, same example, when a web form is submitted, add the contact into my CRM. You can just put those details in, and AI will generate the Zap for you.
It's very helpful.
All you have to do is try and map that out, which sounds easier than, the first thing, like I said, is just trying to do it yourself. That's everything.
And as you say, do it on dummy data. Always start on dummy data. But I think that's a great example, like the whole web form collection automation, because it's prompt to the person that's sent in an inquiry, and it shows that you're willing, but actually you're automating that in the background. I think that's a great example. Look, there's so much in the world of Zapier that we can delve into, but I know you do a lot on this. You've got some books that you've created, and you run some courses, etc. Could you just I guess say to anyone that's watching the best way, if they want to learn more, how they could reach out to you and find out more?
Yes, so reach out to me on LinkedIn. That'd be a good place for us to connect. You can get in touch with me through my website, so solvaa.co.uk, so solvaa.co.uk, and I've got a bunch of resources on there. So we've got a free ebook that just explains the basics of Zapier. We have some new courses that are coming out as part of our Automation Academy. All the links are on the website. We've got a YouTube channel. I've got these two books that you can see, first edition and second edition of Automate It with Zapier, and the new one is And with Generative AI. So if you want to learn how to use Zapier, this book, the second edition, is like a really good resource, and it's a good starting point to try and learn how to do it yourself. And of course, it's got all the principles in it about improving your systems, process improvement and all of that stuff before you start automating, and all of the basics. So, yeah.
I've got to say, Kelly, that does not look a thin book from what I can see. So no. It's going to take a little bit of time to get through.
You can see it at the bottom down there. It's 700 something pages, but it's very comprehensive. And it's kind of like a reference more than anything else. It talks about the basics, and then it goes into the complicated stuff of how to use all of the different built-in apps. Because I think we didn't really talk about that, but the built-in apps are things that can help you to do things like format data, do calculations, capitalize words. There's a whole lot of stuff that it can do, which is really cool because it's all built in there. You don't need to know how to code. It's all without code. You just really need to understand how to build a Zap, and the first couple of chapters will walk you through that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kelly. And I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this week's show. So hopefully everyone that's been watching this episode has provided you with valuable insights that you can take forward, especially in the world of Zapier, not Zapier, Zapier. Please do check out the show notes for links to Digital Disruptors, SB Digital and Solvaa, and anything and anyone that we've also referenced in this show. If you want to ensure you catch future episodes, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure you look out for the release on every Thursday morning. We look forward to speaking to you next week.